If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the bell. If you are listening on your favorite podcast platform, follow, rate, and review the show. It helps us grow and keep these voices alive. Now, stay tuned because we've got two big things coming your way. An exciting new series lifting up the voices of AmeriCorps seniors, and in early 2026, we'll be officially releasing the Get Things Done framework, built from the wisdom and stories shared right here on this podcast.
And it worked so well that it kind of scared some people, because what happens when you empower people to change the world? They do. Service is so important to individuals who want to serve and who receive services from the people serving, organizations that have national service members, and then communities. Sometimes the most exciting thing happening in a small town in Vermont is the new AmeriCorps member. And States for Service, the advocacy arm of America's Service Commissions, has focused on ensuring the future for national service, that we receive funding, but also building national service leaders and national service advocates.
I'm recording right now, and if you say anything that we want to cut out, we can, but you're starting to get into some good stuff. So you were reflecting on your NCCC and the disasters.
Yeah, and when NCCC has come in, it's amazing to just see the hope that they bring to people. And yes, there's the practical getting your basement mucked out, but there's also this whole other aspect of a team of people in a van pulling up, hopping out, crawling into your basement or crawl space in a Tyvek suit, getting super muddy, and then they come out. And I've heard people say some pretty wild things that I would have framed differently than they framed. But essentially, who would have thought that a group of people like that would be available to come and help me? And
right.
I've never seen a group of young people do something like that. And these are folks who were just severely impacted, sometimes for the third and fourth time. Our homes near where I live that were flooded in 2017, that NCCC mucked out the basement. And just now, some of them are getting bought out by FEMA after the floods we had in 2023 and 2024. And so, right, those teams show up. And I don't know that you can actually put a dollar value on the inspiration that they bring to folks who really just had their world turned upside down, who might not know where to start, who maybe know where to start but can't because of physical limitations or illness or whatever. So, national service, I think, is actually the answer to a lot of what divides us right now. I think people helping people is just fundamentally American, and it's what we want to do. You don't ask people anything political when you see them get impacted by a disaster. You ask them, what do you need? And then you do what you can. And when people donate money to organizations for disaster relief, or they send things, only the things that have been requested, of course, but they send things to a disaster area that have been requested, you're sending that because you want to help your neighbors. They're your distant neighbors, but they're your neighbors. We're all in this together. We're all on this wild ride together. And you don't send it thinking, I wonder what they think about this issue or what they think about this issue.
Right.
You send it thinking, these people just had their world turned upside down. And if that was me, I would want help. And then people help people, and you go from there. So I love national service in AmeriCorps.
Well, I know you're definitely a juice drinker, that's for sure. But I don't know if you saw the video or the last interview with Willie over at the Indiana Commission. And one of the things that struck me was that he did FEMA Corps when he was first out of college. He was 23, and he was literally going to people whose houses, just like you said, had literally just been washed away and they had nothing at 23 years old or 22 years old. So the amount of empathy and compassion and internal processing that they had to learn as those FEMA members at the age of 20, like, it's hard skills that we learn in AmeriCorps. And it's also those soft skills where you stop when during my service year as a volunteer coordinator, and I was always like, let's get this all done. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. But sometimes I had volunteers that wanted to talk and reminisce
Yep.
and say why this garden was important to them and tell me the background of this flower. And I learned during my service year to stop and listen and be a human and connect. And I think that's what you're speaking to, is that that's something that national service provides. It's an opportunity for us to slow down and connect as humans, to figure out what's needed, and then to see if we could take care of it, and then to figure it out together.
Yeah. And a lot of the actual outputs, right? The things we measure are super important. The piece we can't measure, and maybe we would even lose something from it if we tried too hard to measure it, are all those intangibles, the connections, the person who needed to tell their story, the person who needed to hear the story, the person who was having a bad day until they saw somebody doing something nice for somebody else, the person who has never had an opportunity to do whatever the thing is. Some of my most vivid memories of service are moments that did not show up anywhere in my position description or in what I was supposed to be doing, in one sense. And then in another sense, they were like, oh, this is exactly why this position exists, to do exactly this thing that happened. And good luck figuring out what the metric is on that one, but that life seems to be changed.
Yeah. So I guess we should start the podcast.
Let's.
So for everybody, thank you so much for joining the AmeriCorps Connections podcast. If you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe. It really makes a difference in the podcast algorithms. So if you like this content and you want it to continue, I just need you to hit subscribe and share it. So I'm really excited to be here with Phil Kolling. Is that right? Kolling?
Phil Kolling, yep.
Phil Kolling. He's the Executive Director of Serve Vermont, and you've been in a position for quite a while, so good for you for sticking
Thanks.
it out. We're going to listen to the journey of your AmeriCorps year, and it's my understanding that you did 2 years. Is that right?
Almost.
Okay. Yep, that's okay. So Conservation Corps for Maine, and then a VISTA position, I think, in Vermont. So we'll go through your service year. Love to reflect on how you found out about AmeriCorps, what made you serve, and obviously your journey into, like, whenever I talk about my story, and it's probably similar to you, where I love that I had the boots on the ground feeling. So it was being in the trees. I couldn't see above the trees. I was a member. I was doing the thing. And then I was a director of a program. So then I was at that 15, 20,000 foot view where I was, oh my gosh, look at all of us doing a bunch of cool shit. And then all of a sudden I was at commission level, and I was, Elon Musk on my way to Mars going, holy crap.
I wish we had the budget.
Yeah, right. Hey, Elon, are you looking for a sponsor? AmeriCorps. Wow, I could go there really inappropriately. I'm not going to. But that 150,000 foot view from the commission level, especially from an executive director position, really put so many things in perspective for me of the big impact that we have. And that's the genesis of this podcast of where are our AmeriCorps alums? What are they doing? I think a lot of times people think about national service and they're, oh, nonprofit. Oh, that's nice. Or, oh, social work, or, oh, a teacher. But no, if you've gone through the 90 episodes that I've had, people have jobs all over the place. Anyways, another part of this podcast, which I'm really looking forward to getting into, is the American Service Commission's National Service Advocacy Academy, which I definitely want us to spend some time on to talk about why that's important, how people can get involved, and next steps. I went through the academy. It was super helpful for me to frame how to speak about AmeriCorps and all the things. So Phil, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, wherever you want to dive in, love to know about, like, how did you learn about AmeriCorps way back in the day and what made you want to serve?
Well, thank you for having me. And similar, I've heard this story multiple times across your episodes. Similar to many, my own journey into AmeriCorps was a little bit accidental. I'm very transparent about that because it was not like I said, oh, I want an AmeriCorps position. It was more of a aligning of the stars, I guess, since I've never really left. I've tried my hardest at different points in time, but I've never really left in the fullest sense. So I'll actually start my journey into AmeriCorps with being in college, studying community development. I chose community development because it sounded great. Took some of the courses, loved them. Other than like maybe a city planner, which you would probably need a little more education as well, there is no clear path to your career. So as I was headed towards graduation, doing what you're supposed to do and applying for jobs, I was getting lots of rejections even before interviews saying, we want more grant writing experience.
Mm.
So I was about to lose my mind. I'm 21 years old. What do you expect me to have in terms of grant writing experience? And how do I get that? So that was one piece at play. Simultaneously, I thought that I might want to join the Peace Corps. And so I went to the recruiter's office at the University of New Hampshire and said, I might be interested in serving in Peace Corps. What do I do? And they said, oh man, it's a 2-year kind of path to get there between when you apply and when you deploy. You should put your application in now if you ever want to do that. So I did. And I had a couple unique things in my application. One, community development aligns really well with showing up in a country and developing community. So, knew that there was that kind of tie. And then I had another interesting tie, which was that I had studied abroad in India. And when I was there, I had done a little internship with a reforestation project of the tropical dry evergreen forest. I didn't study a whole lot else in terms of like ecology or natural resources management, but I had that little experience. I'm applying for Peace Corps in April, I believe. I'm about to graduate in May. I'm like 2 weeks out from graduation, and I get a call from the Peace Corps recruiter. Quick, do all your paperwork, do your physical. We have a position for you. Reforestation in Asia. And I said, oh,
That's so cool.
It was super cool. I was like, oh. And I said, where in Asia? And he said, we don't know. All over Asia. There's all kinds of places we're going. And so I looked at a world map, and Asia's big.
It's really big.
It's really big. It's half the world. And full transparency, I kind of freaked out. It's like, that's going to somewhere in Asia. Oh, and we were going to deploy 2 weeks after graduation. I would have been in the Peace Corps full blown 2 weeks after graduation. And when this was all happening, I was like a month out. And so I actually took a couple more steps, did the physical, all that kind of stuff. And then I just I freaked out and said 2 years is a long time to go commit to something that you don't fully understand. Thanks, but no thanks. And in the meantime, once I knew I wasn't doing that, I started, excuse the dog, but I started applying for jobs, and I applied for one with Montpelier Parks in Montpelier, Vermont. I had been to Vermont, I think, but wasn't really familiar. And I'm applying for all kinds of positions, so I'm not really specifically targeting anything. Probably this was before graduation that I was applying. So I'm just throwing things out there. I ended up being a summer camp counselor, which was a blast for the summer. Became an environmental educator for the fall. And one super random evening, I get a call that then say, hi, it's 7:00 on a Friday night. I just finished my week as an environmental educator. How can I help you? I didn't say all those things, but that's retrospectively what I was thinking. And the person says, I'm calling about your application to this AmeriCorps position with Montpelier Parks. Can you talk right now? And I actually couldn't. I was out with all the other environmental educators. And I said, I'll call you tomorrow. I do. And he says, I want to interview you for this position with Montpelier Parks. I said, okay, I'll come up. I'll interview. Show up. It's this beautiful park. Montpelier is one of the smallest state capitals. It's a population of 6,000 to 8,000 people, I believe. A lot more people work there. and they have this beautiful park system. I think it's the most acres of park per area of any state capital or some other statistic that's very much related to being a very tiny place. We love that in Vermont. We love being the most whatevers per capita because there's like 3 people who whatever
Right.
statistic applies to. Most coffee drank per capita is like me single-handedly. No. Uh, and I went up, interviewed, thought the place was really cool, and guess what? I would get to write some grants. Ooh, there's some grant writing experience for you, all you other jobs looking to deny me. And a lot of it was like volunteer management, and I didn't ask a whole ton of questions because I was kind of into it. It seemed kind of cool, and I said, okay, I'll take the job. And I heard like this on another one of your episodes, someone has this literal same story where then he's okay, go talk to these people. I'm like, who are those people? Oh, it's AmeriCorps people. Because
Actually, my story where I was like, wait, why am I going to Baltimore when I'm serving in a different county? And then I got my car towed because I'd never been in Baltimore before.
Yeah. So talk to the AmeriCorps people. I'm like, what is this? And then it's very interesting. No, I would say AmeriCorps was not on my radar during the I'm about to graduate college, search for a job search. But as I was learning more about it, I had this memory of growing up and as a kid going to church with my family. There was this point in time where all these people who went to that church joined what I now realize was City Year, and they all church in their red jackets and their cargo pants. And so as I was like, oh, that's what these people from church all did. That's pretty cool. Okay, what the heck? Like I was interested in Peace Corps, fine. And it was a VISTA position, by the way, that I learned I was headed towards, the capacity building poverty alleviation arm of AmeriCorps. There were a couple different missions we were going to work on, including some invasive species removal. So I was very much focused on the volunteer management piece in the position.
Right.
And so I was going to lead these crews and the grant writing. Yes. I was not going to be, I was not thinking that I would be doing these things. I was going to be behind the scenes making these things happen. And so I joined what was called the Vermont Youth Tomorrow VISTA program. It had a sister program that was the Vermont Youth Development Corps AmeriCorps State Program. And it was run by a couple of fabulous people who I still know to this day, Nick Nicolay and Katie Schaefer. They did a great job. I now realize they were like unbelievable program directors in terms of impeccable records, etc.
Right.
As a commission ED, I now value that more than I did. I can't say I always got my timesheets in on time as a member, but now I hope
I'll just digress there for 1 second. When I became director of Volunteer Maryland, that's actually where I did my service as an AmeriCorps member. I was looking through my file. I was like a bad. I was not a very good member.
Yep. And not recognizing the amount of thought and effort that goes into every aspect of running a program. I think that is actually one of the pieces I love about my job now, is being able to support program staff in offering that experience to members. Because if members are going through service, having a good experience, hitting their bumps and all that, there's the whole life cycle of a service year. They're having a relatively seamless experience. It's because there was a lot of planning and thought and effort that went into that. And if it's done perfectly, you don't even recognize that. And that's actually the program I served in, I would say, worked that way more or less. I did not realize at the time what was happening behind the scenes to support me. And I've said thank you multiple times since then to make sure they know that I now understand. At least one of their alums understands. But actually, this is a total digression, but it's a good one. This particular VISTA program and AmeriCorps State program, but it's actually all the VISTA side of it. It's really interesting, the folks that it has produced. So Jacqueline Kolar in Texas, the AmeriCorps, I forget her exact title down there, but she served in that program actually when I worked there. Gretchen in New Hampshire, the ED of the New Hampshire Commission, also served in that program as a VISTA leader. I served in that program. And then there's a couple, so that's like folks who have stayed in the commission network. A
Yeah.
couple other folks have gone on to work at other commissions. I'm forgetting who now. And then there's just some really interesting ones like Matt Brantner, who headed up WISCOR for a long time, served as a VISTA with me, like
Wow.
different places. He served at a different site, but it's interesting because, and I think a lot of it had to do with, we always talked about esprit de corps and coming together for these very thoughtful trainings with these very thoughtful member reflections. And I always say, when I was feeling great about how my month had been between trainings, somebody would be hitting some kind of roadblock or challenge that was frustrating for them. And then when I was down and feeling like I wasn't making progress, somebody would have had a successful month. And I think it really built this belief in AmeriCorps and esprit de corps. So it's a really amazing thing that happens. And then we're all like, I'm not going to say stuck. We're choosing to be here, but we're all still in the national service world in one way or another. But
to that point, when do you cycle out? I'm learning so much. Like, when is a good time to step away? Because you're always in 3 service years. You're in the one that just finished, you're in the current one, and then you're also in the one that's up and coming. And we talked about this earlier before I hit record, and you're working with people. I found that it's just such a cool niche to be part of. And any AmeriCorps alum that I run into, I'm like, you have no idea. You're part of something so massive that we can't even find each other, right? We have 25,000 or 26,000 people in LinkedIn right now in our group. That's 26,000, but there's 1.5 million or 1.2 or 1.3 million people who have served as AmeriCorps members. So that is just like a drop in the bucket of where everybody.
As a field, we don't do great with that all the time.
I'm hoping that this podcast is helping with that.
I hope so too. And it's so true. It's a truly overwhelming community of people. And there have been a few really, I'm going to call them interesting things that have happened over the years. Once we reached out to the Vermont legislature, the state legislature, to see who served in AmeriCorps. And this was actually a while ago. At the time, I think AmeriCorps was about 20 years old. This is 10 years ago or more. And at that point, VISTA was 50 years old or so. And we said, hey, if you served in AmeriCorps, could you let us know? And we reached out and people let us know. But the number of people who said, I served in as a VISTA before AmeriCorps, can you count me? We're like, yes. They're like, good, I want to be counted. And then the number of people who said, well, no, but Peace Corps and AmeriCorps didn't really exist, like not realizing the whole, VISTA thing and all that was unbelievable. And you're like, that's our community. And you can change the name and you can change how it works and you can make the oldest program out of all of them that still exists the child of the newer program, and you can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, there are all these service programs. And so it is like overwhelming if you actually think about all the people who have served. And I think those of us in the AmeriCorps world are really lucky because when people realize that's what we do, they come out with, oh, you know what? I served back in the day, or, oh, hey, I did that, or what do you do? And that's true like in life too, right? If someone hears I work for the state and they say, oh, what do you do? And I say, oh, I help run AmeriCorps. It is not infrequent. Say, oh, I served in AmeriCorps. Or sometimes I think I served in AmeriCorps. Is such and such a program? That happens.
A lot.
And it's interesting as time goes on, because it tends to be that folks who are not 20 years old are members of Congress and in the state legislature and all that. And so as time goes on and we build up this alumni network, and people who served at the beginning of AmeriCorps are getting older and progressing in their careers, or retiring and joining their state legislature or whatever, our ranks are ending up all over the place.
I love that. I want to pull the thread here because I feel like we're going to talk forever. So you did VISTA year. And then tell me what you did afterwards. What did you transition to, and what was your biggest takeaway of that year?
Yeah, so I have to go back to my VISTA year to make the connection. But as I was managing all of these volunteers, and we actually had a pretty substantial number of our volunteers were youth from the local diversion program. Some of what they had community service hours for was your typical minor, youthful indiscretion happenings, they would come up to the park and we would engage them in tree planting and all that kind of stuff. So a pretty sort of average experience. And then another handful, like a handful of the folks that we were engaging as volunteers for their community service hours had pretty significantly more serious offenses. And the parks team was not turned off by that at all, and actually said this is a great environment for these folks to learn some job skills, to learn how to improve their lives, all that kind of stuff. As I was working with these youth and using the kind of broad definition of youth, some of these folks were older than I was at the time, and they just had different life experiences that had brought them to this point where we're out there together trying to get some things done. And I really liked some of the aspects of what we were doing, trail work, a little bit of bridge building and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to do more of it. Once I was done with my VISTA year, I wasn't done learning about that kind of stuff. I joined the Maine Conservation Corps as a trail team leader and went up to Maine thinking I was going to see all parts of Maine, go way up north, do all that kind of fun stuff. Participated in their trail training academy in the winter, did some wilderness first responder training, some chainsaw training, all the other crew leader training type stuff, and then went out for a really wet summer. The summer of 2008 was incredibly rainy in Maine, and just learned so much stuff that complemented nicely what I had learned in VISTA. We talk about the hard skills. Yes, chainsaw training is a cool hard skill to have. I actually talk about that one a lot because when we have storms and trees fall down, I know what to do and how to do it safely. And so it's actually one of the skills I use the most directly, the most frequently.
I will say I went through chainsaw training also, and I realized I don't ever want to use a chainsaw.
Also a good thing to learn.
Away.
Also a good thing to learn, right? To know what you're, and actually that was a really cool piece of Trail Training Academy, is there were people who came to the chainsaw training who would start and then say, you know what, I know I don't want to do that. And the answer is great, perfect. Don't do that then, because let's not do stuff we don't want to like that. And learn some really valuable things. Like one of the things that I remember the most vividly is it was pouring for days. We were up camping on a shelter, a near shelter, doing rock work, rebuilding a rock staircase that was scheduled to take 6 or more years to build. Like we were year 2 or 3, I forget exactly. And then there were going to be 4 more years after us. And we were there for 8 weeks. And I had a weather radio, like the hand crank one. And I was like, what's going on? I'm going to listen. And it says on the weather radio, if you're in the backcountry, get out of there. There could be landslides. I was like, what do I do? Gosh. Right. And again, I'm 22 years old. We're in the middle of a spike, but I'm in charge of this crew. And I said, I don't know, like risk management, what do you do? And I said, well, let's get the heck out of here. It's a day early. The mud is not going to dry out enough to actually set rocks. That's all we're doing. Let's get out of here. So I pulled my crew. And we're in the middle of nowhere. And this was the iPhone had just come out. One person on the crew had an iPhone, but everyone else, like, we didn't really have great communication, right? The cell network was still not great in the backcountry. So I pulled the crew, show up at campus, you know, where our headquarters. I got chewed out for leaving early. It was like, this group is paying you all. Yeah. It was like, this group is paying you all to be out there. You're kind of shortchanging them. It's just rain, you know, all this stuff. And I felt awful. And I really respected the guy who was chewing me out. He was like a legend in the trail building community, Lester Kenway. And actually, anyone who knows Lester Kenway would know chewing out he's not a loud guy, but what he says you hear, right? So it was like probably the calmest thing any of us have ever heard, but I heard a lot of subtext there. And so I left to go have my couple days off or whatever, feeling awful about myself. Awful. I was like, I'm such an idiot. I broke the rules. I want to do a good job. I'm not. We came back for our next spike to prepare to load up the vans, and he was standing there. And he called me over and he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I said all that stuff. He said, there was a landslide. It took out like 1.5 miles of trail. Not where we were. We would not have been hit. But had we been somewhere else or by the luck, and he said that was ultimately a good call, and I'm sorry. And right here I am 18 years later. That's the thing I remember, because there was a bunch packed in there. There was like leadership,
Yes.
acknowledging when you're wrong, owning it, making sure I understood. I was like, oh my God, one of the biggest lessons, you know what? That did not show up in any metric. It's not a number of stone steps. It's not a number of acres. But here I was like, all right, that's how I want to live my life.
Yeah. One of the things
like that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that was always my mantra when I was running a program or a commission was that I'd say we would look at all of the decisions that we had to make. And I would say, we would choose something, and I'd say, I feel comfortable standing in front of the inspector general saying, this is how we made this decision. This is why I made this decision. And this is how we came up with it. It may have been the wrong decision, but this is how we decided. To your point, I assessed the situation. That reassurance for him to come back there and say, I'm sorry, is just such an amazing, I love good leaders.
And I like to think that, just like you're saying, when we're making decisions or when we're questioning the decisions of others, because it happens.
Yeah.
Every once in a while that pops in my head, and I just think, why tell me why you did that again? Let me see if I can understand this or see this from your angle. And it's that, like, I think he probably had a moment where he said, wow, imagine if that slide had happened where the crew was. What would we be talking? That'd be a different conversation, right? And so, that was like one of the things that stuck with me. And, it's fun to live in a tent. I actually reflect back sometimes when I hear members talk about how low the living allowance is, which they're not wrong. They're right. But I think to myself, like, I was actually clearing more money having a junky car and living in a tent and doing trail work than after I pay adult bills.
Yeah.
Feed some teenagers. Like, it's so I look back very fondly. And then after that, national service just kept popping into my life, whether I liked it or not. Sometimes my hand was forced. The work I was doing when the economy collapsed in 2008 after, I'll own this. I'm going to own this very publicly. I own it publicly. I'm not quiet. I quit the Maine Conservation Corps early. I was supposed to do a fall term. And I did the summer. We had a successful summer, and then we were in the fall, and this girl gave me an ultimatum, and I followed her, and we're now married. Yeah. So I quit. Shame on me, but so it was a great decision. But the work I was doing at that time offered me enough freedom. It didn't occupy me enough, and so I actually was part-time director of the program I had served in. And then I just keep, porpoising back to national service. I think one of your guests, Dana Benjamin Allen, was at the Boys and Girls Clubs when I was at one of my lowest points of employment, and I applied for a position. And what she says in that podcast is true. She's like, oh, national service alum. We have this crazy thing happening just outside Boston where we're running a teens-only Boys and Girls Club. So I was the director there, and then it's very cool to work with alums who are just interested in getting things done. And it's everything everybody says about that, knowing that people can be creative, knowing that people can work with very little. And relatively speaking, when I came on, that club was very well developed because of the efforts of Dana and others. And then we just did some wild things and started a recording studio, took this abandoned school and made it a place that people wanted to show up. It was so cool. And then I only left there because I had the opportunity to come back to Vermont and start a new VISTA program at the commission. And so
actually, I'm using your cup right now.
There you go. There you go.
Go Dana.
Go Dana.
So I love all of this. This is so good. And for AmeriCorps members who are going through their service year right now or have just completed, these are the stories that you're going to be able to tell. And these are the feelings and the thoughts and the remembrances that you'll be able to take with you. I want to pull the thread a little bit. You've been with the Vermont Commission for a long time. Tell us a little bit about that trajectory. When you move from program manager to executive director of a commission, that role is really different, right? You have to, let's talk a little bit about how you stayed within the commission and how you rose through the ranks.
Yeah. So we're a small commission. When I came to Serve Vermont to start the VISTA program, I was the 5th staff member. At that time, budgets were decreasing a little bit. And so with natural attrition, we went down to 3 staff. And our VISTA program was being very successful. Our executive director moved on to other things. And there was a executive director search happening. And I heard some of what folks were talking about the direction of the commission. And a lot of what was being talked about was searching for a leader who could name all the volunteer things. It was like statewide volunteer management, all this stuff.
Emergency management.
Emergency management, which we do play a role in emergency management, which actually is a thread for me at Serve Vermont. So I started working for Serve Vermont in August 2011. Got my office, got my desktop computer, no laptops in state government at the time. And 2 weeks later, we had a huge flood that flooded our whole offices, and the likes of which we had not had since 1929 or 28, whenever that other flood was. And Tropical Storm Irene was the storm, came up the East Coast and then dumped rain on Vermont. And then things were relatively quiet until we had huge floods in 2023 and 2024 as well. And we do manage spontaneous volunteers during disaster. So typically that's like an other duty as assigned, but it's actually a major focus of ours currently and in the recent past. But as I heard all of these things, we're going to change the world with the State Service Commission, which I would love, by the way. But I was just realizing like 99% of our funding is attached to national service and is grants from the Corporation for National and Community Service, DBA, AmeriCorps. And we need to be very careful that we focus on our core mission as well. And so not wanting to take the wind out of our sails of this expansive vision of what a state service commission could be, but to make sure we didn't lose the great national service programs that we were supporting, I brought the conversation up with leadership and leadership of we sit in the Agency of Human Services. State service commissions can be all over the place in state government, but we're an affiliated board of the Agency of Human Services. And, brought it up and basically said we should be making sure we're thinking about national service. And then, of course, as happens in the world, they said, well, if you're thinking about that, then why don't you do it? And I said, okay, I'm willing to be considered. There was some risk in Vermont. It is the executive director position of the commission is a gubernatorial appointee. And I didn't know the governor or have any connections or frankly the experience. And so they said, okay, you sound like you know more about this than we do. We're willing to give it a shot. So I became the executive director. I think at the time people made kind of a fuss about how young I was for being the commission executive director. Shout out to Adam in Iowa, who I think is the only person who we know was appointed younger. At least at that point in time, it was like, oh, Adam was like 15 years old when he got appointed. So you're a lot older than him. But, and then I believe in AmeriCorps. I believe in the word. Right. So I just wanted to push on that. At some points, we were as small as 2 people for a not insignificant amount of time, like the ED and the program officer, which at that size, you're definitely an executive reactor. There isn't a whole lot of executive directing. It's more of an executive reactor.
Yeah.
And then we had, I hired to replace myself, and we had the same staff for over a decade, the same 3 folks. So we didn't grow, we didn't contract in that way, but in that time, we went from having 4 AmeriCorps state programs to having as many as 6 at different periods of time with planning grants on top of that. We increased our competitive portfolio and then leaned into opportunity. Like I remember vividly, and this is actually a fun alum story as well. We had the Governor Mayor Initiative opportunity. Basically, if you submitted, it wasn't a special pot of money, but if you submitted an application to the AmeriCorps competition and it had the endorsement of your governor and a mayor, and in Vermont, we have very few mayors. We only have a few towns that even have mayors. Usually they're the chair of the select board. In some towns, it's like, who wants to be the mayor, who's willing to be the mayor and serve in that capacity. And so I had gone to the governor's office and said, you can either develop a new program with us, or here's what we're currently supporting. Name it, and it will be funded probably. And at the same time, another person I knew from my service who I had served with, Justin Kinney, was working for the Department of Environmental Conservation. We had been VISTAs together, and he said, why don't we have a program at the Department of Environmental Conservation? I said, I don't know. I think the answer is because we don't. And at the time, there was also pressure on the state of Vermont to reduce the amount of phosphorus going into Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain is the largest non-Great Lake in the United States. It doesn't show up on the fancy map of the United States because it's narrow, so people don't think it even exists, but it's a huge body of water. And we decided we were going to work with the Department of Environmental Conservation. Shout out to some of our AmeriCorps programs at the time who lent all kinds of expertise to the Department of Environmental Conservation to come up with this proposal. And they said, we want an AmeriCorps program where the AmeriCorps members are in the community doing education, installing rain gardens, and doing other things, riparian buffers, invasive species removal that will reduce the phosphorus entering Lake Champlain. And as that was a concept, the USDA, the federal agency worried about the phosphorus in Lake Champlain, said, that's so cool. We love that idea. Do that, and you'll be able to receive some other federal money. And so we informally braided federal funding and created a program that we just put the bow on. After 10 years, they decided to cease operation of the program. And it was just amazing because it was called ECO, AmeriCorps Environmental Career Opportunities. And the number of folks who served in that program did various, it was an intermediary program. So there are all different smaller agencies doing all kinds of stuff, as well as at the Department of Environmental Conservation itself. Not only did a lot to improve the environment, but then a huge chunk of their members, their alums, moved into positions all throughout Vermont. And, you know, we have brain drain in Vermont, like a lot of places do. We have a aging population, more so than a lot of other states. And about 60 to 70% of our folks relocate to serve. And so we're a net importer of Vermonters. And that's not what AmeriCorps was created to do, but it certainly is a cool side effect of having a fabulous AmeriCorps program that people are interested in.
Something that is just so important for people to take away from that is the massive impact that if you can be creative and thoughtful about how to blend federal funds with state funds, with community funds to make this large impact, that's what AmeriCorps does. I want to lead us into what you're doing now in this current moment. We're recording on October 23rd, 2025. There's stuff going on. It's about the beginning of the year. There's been a lot going on. About a little bit about your service with America's Service Commissions, and talk a little bit about who they are. We did have Chad Driscoll on a podcast. I brought Chad and Maureen Eccleston on the podcast in May after the NCCC members were released from service. And I said, excuse my language, what the fuck's going on? Somebody explain this to us. And it was crazy because right after that podcast, there were so many things that were happening. And I'm like, okay, I can't be the podcast that is getting people on every day because I do this from 6 to 11. So set the landscape and then talk about the Advocacy Academy and how alums could get involved and what that looks like.
Yeah. So it is an interest for national service for sure. I think people,
nice way of putting it.
I think people know broadly what happened back in April for the most part. In Vermont, we did receive notice that all of our grants were going to be terminated, all of our AmeriCorps state grants. And basically, from that point forward, our stance was we don't want to lose AmeriCorps and we want this to continue. And so I won't go into details about everything that the state of Vermont has done, but I think we have certainly heard really clear recognition of the value that AmeriCorps members bring to Vermont and a very clear desire to preserve that. So we still have AmeriCorps programs. They are still enrolling people for the new program year. We actually did what you should do in times of crisis and lean into it a little bit as well to make some adjustments. So one adjustment is that our programs that are still in operation, we always had the traditional AmeriCorps program year from September 1st serving through August. And we now have this track record from the last few years of having very severe flooding in July. And we actually even had much smaller in scale, but we had flooding on July 10th of 2023, 2024, and now 2025. 2025 was the smallest. 2023 was the largest.
Wow.
2024 was not good, but a lot of the places that got hit in 2024 were still recovering from 2023, hadn't fully rebuilt, etc. But we had this recognition that we have this great resource of AmeriCorps members, and they're essentially finishing service right after these major flood events. So our cadence got, it's fair to say, got messed up by all of the stuff that was happening this last spring. Now we're looking to enroll most of our members in December and January. And so they'll come in. We're preparing to provide them with some trainings so they're better prepared to respond to disasters. That's always been something that we have technically been able to do in Vermont, but we're seeing that with changes in weather patterns, it's happening more frequently. And we want our folks to be ready to serve and to help. And so how beautiful is that? If you start in January, you can get some training, you can be ready to go. If we're going to have severe weather, hopefully we don't, but if we do, we're ready. And then you're not just finishing service in August, you're finishing in December or in November. And so that's a little bit farther down the road. There's opportunities like that. And we're thinking about what's next. Service is so important to individuals who want to serve and who receive services from the people serving, organizations that have national service members, and then communities. Sometimes the most exciting thing happening in a small town in Vermont is the new AmeriCorps member. We have one right now that's serving at a library in Morrisville, and that member, that VISTA, showed up, and so many people started showing up at the library, said, "We heard you were coming. We're so glad you're here. This is great." And that's a community that was flooded. So many communities in Vermont were flooded, but hey, just having a new VISTA serving at the library, bringing that enthusiasm and some new ideas is a refreshing change of pace for folks. We're really excited about the future of AmeriCorps in Vermont. Cool. I'm always excited about state service commissions. So state service commissions like Serve Vermont, I always describe us as the states' rights arm of AmeriCorps. There's a lot of great history there. When AmeriCorps was created in its current iteration in the 90s, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it. There was this strange thing called bipartisan support for it, something we don't hear a lot about these days. And part of that was, yes, it is a big federal program and there's bureaucracy involved. But another part of it was also that states have a really strong voice in what happens with AmeriCorps within their borders. And so state service commissions are the primary vehicle for service delivery in the state. And we can do a lot of things that make AmeriCorps more relevant to whatever's happening within our borders. For us, a great example, we have been really focused on floods and a lack of housing that was exacerbated by flooding. And we can leverage our AmeriCorps members to address that, and in fact have been. We have a program that's been around since almost the beginning of AmeriCorps with Vermont Housing and Conservation Board working to do just that. So
I think something that you're saying right now is really important. Sometimes when we think about national service, there's the traditional way of serving in schools and community centers and all of those things. But there's this pivot. This is the reason why state service commissions are important, because what Vermont needs is not what Arizona needs. And what Arizona needs is not what Colorado needs. And what Colorado needs is not what Puerto Rico needs, right?
totally. And I think, what keeps me in this work, I think a lot of it is ask and the other state service commissions, because I get so much joy out of hearing something that's happening in some other state that just wouldn't fly in Vermont for whatever reason. We don't have the population density. We're a totally different environment. You're like, that's the coolest thing. And that just can't happen in Vermont. And then vice versa, right? You can do things that in other states you can't do. You hear about whatever the local thing is that AmeriCorps members are doing. So we have AmeriCorps members teaching kids how to cross-country ski. Yes, there are huge parts of the country that you can do that in, and there are huge parts of the country you can't do that in.
You're right.
It's so cool. And you, as a individual who might want to serve, can choose. I say it's great. If you have a Vermonter who wants to serve and they want to go out to California and serve, great. I would ask them to please come back at the end. What a great experience. Likewise, someone from California wants to come serve in Vermont, please do, even if you know you're going to go home at the end. Or actually, I think you might be convinced that you want to stay, but it's that variety.
Out in California is a little bit different than Vermont. I grew up in California. I've never
know what they say, right? I got to stick it right here. Ski the East. It's its own unique animal. If you can ski here, you can ski anywhere. And so, I've been heavily involved with ASK the whole time I've been at the State Service Commission. Right now, I'm actually in my second term on the board, or second stint on the board. I did 2 back-to-back terms, took a break, and then I've been back for a couple of years now because I just love it. And ASK does a great job. I say this all the time to Kyra and Chad and Rachel, all of them. They are truly the herders, because just as we're saying, if you've talked to one state about one issue, you've talked to one state about one issue. And so they do a great job of taking, there's 53 state service commissions, taking 53 unique sets of needs and somehow coming up with whatever makes the most sense for the most people, right? And we all give a little bit. Sometimes it's not Vermont's personal favorite, whatever ends up happening, but it's what's best for the group. And so it really is our voice. ASK is the voice of state service commissions, and I always like helping to make that happen. Right now, I'm serving as public policy chair, vice chair of the board. And you've mentioned it, one of the most exciting things happening right now in that realm, because national service frequently comes up as a possible budget cut. It happens almost every year. People, I think, grossly undervalue the value that the small dollar value investment in national service results in. It's a super cheap program overall, right? Yes, the Corporation Community Service, AmeriCorps, is a $1 billion agency, but that's actually not that much money right now. And States for Service, the advocacy arm of America's Service Commissions, has focused on ensuring the future for national service, that we receive funding, but also building national service leaders and national service advocates among anybody who cares about national service, AmeriCorps alums, everybody else. And so the National Service Advocacy Academy is a cool online training. It's all online. If you are a member of States for Service, which everybody should be, I'm forgetting the exact cost to join right now, but it is super manageable. Anybody who is a member of States for Service has access to the Academy. You can sign up and you're given a 3-month window. And I believe if that 3-month window isn't reasonable, you can even extend it. But generally speaking, you have 3 months to complete a super reasonable series of online trainings that you can do at your own pace, asynchronously. I actually think I did them over the course of 2 days because I just got hooked. That go into the details about how to be a great national service advocate, and frankly, advocate for anything you care about. Talks a little bit about the workings of Congress, how to develop a great relationship with your members of Congress. My favorite part is the history piece, the history of national service, how we even got where we are now. And I actually ask, there's a whole other piece of the history. You know, we briefly mentioned William James.
We'll just cut to commercial here, and States for Service, I believe it's $50 a year. And with that, I believe as an individual, you are able to jump on the States for Service calls once a month to get a briefing of the budgets and what's going on with AmeriCorps. It's a great way to stay connected and to understand what is going on in the landscape of national service. Along with that, I would suggest, if you haven't already done so, to go ahead, get connected with the AmeriCorps alums on LinkedIn. I'm just giving a little commercial for States for Service. I think Phil's getting to the end of his actual voice because you've been struggling with it.
It's all good.
Yeah, wrap up talking about the Advocacy Academy.
So the history section is really cool. I like it particularly because at the beginning, it talks a little bit about the moral equivalent of war and William James. And in Vermont is where Camp William James, the precursor to the CCC, was started. And it is still a summer camp for youth. And my children have gone there.
That's
so it's
cool.
A very cool
like
history type.
Is the
Civilian Conservation Corps.
Civilian Conservation Corps.
It was a Depression era program.
Okay.
So it was really about putting people to work. Only young men at the time. So it had some flaws as the government program. But Camp William James was a pretty cool experiment. I actually am reading the history of it right now because I didn't quite understand exactly where some of this stuff originated. But basically, the concept was to take pretty youthful folks, same age we generally talk about with AmeriCorps, take some Dartmouth students, take some hilltop farmers, put them together, have them come up with ideas for what they should be doing in terms of service, and see what happens. And it worked so well that it kind of scared some people, because what happens when you empower people to change the world? They do.
Yeah.
So it's I'm in the middle of learning more about it, but I always find the history of national service super interesting because it shows up for us at these critical moments. We might even be in one right now.
I think we are. I think we definitely are. So if somebody was interested in joining the National Service Advocacy Academy, their first steps would be to become a member of States for Service as an individual or an organization, and then they would have access to that academy. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Once you're a member of States for Service, you can just sign up for the academy. It's pretty easy. If you just search for States for Service, it pops up, and then there's links to join right there.
Okay.
And then once you do that, I recall it being very easy to join the academy.
I'll make sure that those links are very easily found in show notes, and we'll link to States for Service and then also the academy. I guess the last thing is, so when I went through the academy, it was very much self-taught. I was able to go through it in, I think, 2.5 days. I just sat down and I got it done. Is there a date? I know there's October to November, but is there a date if people were interested where they would need to make sure that they jumped on board sooner than later? Do you know if there's a date?
That's a great question. And I don't. I do know that it's semi-cohortish.
Okay. Excellent. We'll encourage folks to sign up for States for Service, and then I'll make sure I drop the link for the academy in the show notes so people can find them very easily. So, Phil, I live in Maryland, and my congressperson supports AmeriCorps, supports national service. And so when I get these letters of advocacy, can you speak a little bit to why it is important for us to continue to interact with our congresspeople from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, we have a really supportive delegation here in Vermont too. We're very lucky in that way. So we get to thank them and don't have to convince them of anything. Communicating with them, though, letting them know what's going on is still important because they're busy. They have a million things they're paying attention to. And AmeriCorps is one of those things. So inviting them to things, updating their staff on happenings, letting them know what grants you do and don't receive. All of that is super important to just make sure they know exactly what National Service is doing in their state.
I think too, a piece of that, if somebody is not necessarily involved in a program, to talk about the impact of the program that they went through if they're an AmeriCorps alum and why it's important, right? Like, if you're not involved in an AmeriCorps program at this point, you're not a program manager, you're not in a commission or whatever. If you're an AmeriCorps alum and you're doing something that you feel like because of your national service, you were able to take on that opportunity, would you say that that story is just as impactful?
I would say absolutely, because it highlights the long-term impact of AmeriCorps. So saying, been here for a long time. And the reality is, lots of folks who serve in the public sector for their careers are AmeriCorps alums. I feel like it is most. And so highlighting, I'm an alum, here's what I did, here's what I'm doing now. They can often draw that line and realize this person probably wouldn't be doing this thing if they had not served when they served. And letting them know what the impact was. The education award makes a huge difference for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Sure, it's not keeping pace with the cost of education, but it still is, it's a chunk and it makes a difference. Letting them know that chunk matters, what that did for you, or what classes you got to take because you had it if you're not using it to pay off loans. All of that is important because I think the investment Congress makes in AmeriCorps gets dispersed so well throughout the community and then ends up impacting individuals who serve and are served, and highlighting all of those impacts. What did it provide to you, whether you're a member or a service recipient, whatever, is super important.
That's amazing. And it's such a great way to finish the podcast. So, Phil, I want to thank you so much for, number one, your years of service from an AmeriCorps member to a program director, manager, an executive director. And thank you so much for being on this podcast. I think the information that you shared is important, and I'm really hoping that folks, after they hear this, will get involved with the Academy and will get involved with States for Service for sure. Do you have anything that you just want to wrap up and make sure that we say before we wrap things up?
I would say thank you for having me. I would plug States for Service and the National Service Policy Academy again, for sure. And then a little bit of appreciation for you. A lot of appreciation, really, just for making sure that this podcast exists, for pulling it together. There are so many cool people who you have talked to. There are so many cool stories of service. There are just wonderful people in this whole orbit. And once you're in it, you are kind of stuck. So you can try to leave, but your heart is always part of it. It's a very unique community that does so much good for the world. So keep up this great work.
Wow. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I'm gonna end it there, because if not, I might cry. So if you've gotten this far in the podcast, go ahead and hit subscribe, and then go to States for Service and sign up for $50 for the year or whatever, and take advantage. If you're an alum, reach out to me if you want to tell your story. Phil, thank you so much. And folks, we'll be back with another AmeriCorps Connections podcast as soon as I can wrangle in another guest. And we are closing in on almost 100 episodes.
Yeah.
So this is very exciting. Like, folks, I'm really hoping that we can get to 100 episodes in 2025. Anyways, stay tuned, and thanks so much, Phil. And we'll be back with another one. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicki.